So today, we're reviewing our final Metallica studio album, till they hopefully release the next one very soon. One of the most loved Metallica studio albums of the modern era. An album that had an 8-year gap between it and between Death Magnetic. And that album is Hardwired to Self-Destruct. An album that we're gonna go deep into today and review the positive and negative about it. So welcome friends to our journey to review each and every single one of the Metallica albums till the next one drops later this year or early next year. So let's start. So let's first get to the compositional choices of Hardwired and try and see how Metallica wrote the album and the features when it comes to the composition. What we know is that Metallica on Hardwired was very picky when it came to riffs. They had like 1,000 riff ideas or something, and they only picked the best of the best and turned these riffs into songs and threw the rest away.
I would say probably, 3 years ago or something, we started to really kind of dive in and go through the process of elimination. Some ideas survive, some ideas don't. There were more ideas probably than ever. I personally trusted the riffs that we had to choose from, which were plenty. There's no shortage of ideas that happen in this band.
Which was kinda contradicting to what Metallica did beforehand on the first 4 studio albums, where they tried to utilize everything they wrote into songs. So you would see these long, crazy songs with 10 and 11 riffs in one composition. And also, Hardwired was a very different approach than Death Magnetic, which also had songs that were very crazy and maybe progressive and long with lots of riffs and lots of ideas. And actually, according to Lars, Hardwired was heading towards that direction in the beginning, with being all over the place, with random transitions, too many ideas stuffed into one song. But then they thought, hey, let's just keep the song contained and confined and base it around a melody with a reasonable number of riffs, and let's not overdo it.
I think that if you hear some of the earlier versions of some of these songs, they were longer, a little more all over the place. And one day James comes in and says, some of the stuff's getting a little crazy. Songs were getting kind of longer. We're starting to, 8 minutes, 9 minutes, riff 12, riffs 13. I remember coming in and going, some of the stuff's running a little bit amok, rather than on Death Magnetic, where we continued to sort of push it to get crazier and loopier and more ridiculous. On this record, it was more the opposite.
And this is in fact really true. A lot of Hardwired songs are just based on a few riffs instead of being too crazy, and of course with some exceptions. And it always felt like the riffs that were included in each song were kinda variations of the same melody. Or to put it in better words, maybe not variations, but it felt like they came from the same school, the same style, like they were brother and sister riffs that worked together really well in a single composition, because they were very similar to each other in the overall vibe, which served the song really well. For example, a song that really utilizes what I'm saying there, it's Here Comes Revenge. Different riffs, but they have similar vibes. Also, Mankind is another great example of that. Different riffs in the song, yes, but they seem that they come from the same school and style of songwriting. And as we said, Metallica tried to keep a good balance of how many riffs there are in a song. And because of that, Hardwired songs have a very reasonable average duration. Songs are neither too short, nor too long. They are very average in contrast to Magnetic and Justice. The average duration is like 6 minutes and 66 seconds, which is basically the normal Metallica song duration. Nothing too crazy is happening there. And overall, yes, most of Hardwired songs are indeed around that 6-minute mark. Some songs go to the extreme of short and long, yes, because Hardwired is a very diverse record, but overall, duration-wise, it's pretty normal. Nothing too intense is happening there. Metallica really paid very good attention to the composition quality in that album, and that's why, in my personal opinion, Hardwired to Self-Destruct has the best compositional value and smooth transitions in the entire Metallica discography. And that's the subject of so many different things, as we said. Fluidity between the riffs, the small numbers of ideas used in each song, and of course, because it's freaking Metallica after all, the kings of transitions. So Metallica on Death Magnetic, seeking a lot of craziness and complexity, sacrificed quality of composition, and I think on Hardwired it was the opposite approach. Let's do less riffs, more composing value. And that's why, in my personal opinion, Hardwired has the best transitions and composing value in the entire Metallica discography. And a really weird thing that I've noticed that is probably quite silly is that Lars does a lot of these snare rolls things to help him in transitions. Like on this record, snare rolls are really done a lot of times. And hey, it is done and utilized pretty well in the songs. And Metallica avoided experimenting much on Hardwired. As Kirk mentioned, Metallica in that era has some kind of sound police that would not allow any experimentation. Kirk would be trying out different things and whatnot, and Metallica would immediately reject it. Maybe because they are afraid of the fans hating the record. We all saw what happened with Load and Reload and Saint Anger, which included lots of experimentation and lots of contributions by Kirk, but we all know how the public and the critics perceive the records. So maybe that's why Metallica was very keen on keeping everything at the acceptable terms. And now let's get to the vocals. And I think James did an incredible job singing on this record. One of the biggest Hardwired strong features, alongside to the composition, is the singing.
It's great to hear the process that's gone on the vocal production, on the vocal end, and to hear where it's ended up is really, really great to me. I'm really proud of James and what he's done as creatively with his voice.
And when it came to melodic singing, James sounded amazing on that record. Even though there's only one semi-ballad on Hardwired, which is Halo on Fire, James still utilized melodic and beautiful singing all over the record.
The
And when it came to aggressive metal sounding vocals, Hardwired did indeed have these. James sounding aggressive and heavy, but yet precise and well-made vocals.
In the name of desperation, in the name of wretched pain, in the name of all creation, count insane. One crown shines on through the sound. One crown, born to lose. Long live machine, the future supreme. Man overthrown, spit out the bone.
And I'm having a hard time describing the next style of singing on Hardwired or putting it into words. But like on some parts, he sounded like he was going deep into his voice, sounding a bit squeaky and high-pitched style of singing. I hope you get what I mean.
He sleeps under black seas waiting, lies dreaming in death. All sinners, a future, all saints, a past, beginning, the ending.
And now let's get to the production and mastering of Hardwired to Self-Destruct. And to be honest, Hardwired has one of the best production qualities in the entire of Metallica's discography. It's polished, well-made, pleasant-sounding, heavy and meaty, and all the other adjectives you can mention there. For example, one of the really great things about the Hardwired production is the snare. Hardwired has one of the best snare sounds I've ever listened to on a Metallica record. It resembles with the Black Album snare sound, this powerful, satisfying, heavy drum sound. The bass too is a prominent thing on Hardwired to Self-Destruct. It has a really cool tone, really catchy, and finally, after a long time of the bass being buried in the mix, finally bass is surprisingly audible on the mix of Hardwired to Self-Destruct, which is always a good thing. Well, what about the guitar tone? Well, for me, guitar tones for Death Magnetic and Hardwired don't stand out near as much as Master, Lightning, Justice, even Saint Anger. But still, it's a very cool, unique guitar tone. And for me, guitar tones for Hardwired sounds very, very close to the guitar tone of Death Magnetic. Don't you agree? Well, Hardwired still has the same problem that all music in this day and age fall guilty to, which is over-compression. It's nothing compared to Death Magnetic. Magnetic was way, way, way over-compressed. But Hardwired still has this problem, squishing all layers of a song, drums, bass, guitar, etc., and decreasing the dynamic range of them in order to make the song louder. And that's what compression is in music. And that's now pretty popular, because what's known as the loudness war, making things more compressed and louder, so I don't know, they stand out. Don't get me wrong, as mentioned, Hardwired has a great quality of production. That's one of its strongest features, but it's still a bit louder than the normal level. If you are listening to a song from the Black Album, for example, and you have your speakers at 8 out of 10 volume, when a song from Hardwired pops up, you'll have to decrease the volume a bit. But all said, yes, it's a bit overcompressed, but still, great quality of production, great snare, great bass, great guitar, everything. Well, what about the vocals? Well, for instance, yes, Hardwired's vocals are, of course, auto-tuned, but it's not as overused as, for example, Death Magnetic or S&M. There is no direct vocal part where it would sound artificial or smoother than usual. So even though I don't like the usage of autotune at all costs, on Hardwired it's used in balanced portions and don't contaminate the vocal performance of James Hetfield. So yeah, overall amazing quality of production. So what is Hardwired's album theme? Well, for instance, Hardwired asks the question of whether the traits that make us human, that are built in us, are going to be the reason for our eventual demise and, well, destruction. And that's where the phrase hardwired to self-destruct comes from. But where did James get the idea for such a cool album title? Well, James heard it from a friend that was a struggling addict, and he asked James, are we on default just wrecking our lives and heading towards the wrong direction? Are we, quote, hardwired to self-destruct? And James caught on to that and used it as the new Metallica album title.
The whole sentence of, hardwired to self-destruct came from a friend of mine that, he was kind of throwing out there as a struggling addict, is that what it is? Is that what it's like for us? Are we just, our default is die earlier than we're supposed to, destroy, wreck, destroy our lives, are we hardwired to self-destruct? And that just kind of, that caught my ear.
And that indeed does apply to a lot of the lyrical ideas that are on Hardwired, that are pretty relevant to the general theme of the record. You have, for example, Moth into Flame. It talks about how obsessed humans are with fame and being popular, and how that can make people go insane. And then you have Confusion, that talks about soldiers when they come back home from war, and the PTSD they get reliving the bad memories over and over and over again. Now let's get to Mankind. It talks about the idea of resetting mankind to zero and canceling all the sins and horrible things so we can get back to the pure core of mankind, and to have faith that all the horrible things that mankind is doing would eventually just stop and get back to point zero, to a point where mankind will be as pure as its beginning. And the song overall discusses the sins of mankind and how we're destroying everything, but still having faith in this unkind world. You also got Here Comes Revenge. It's about the need and the urge of mankind from the beginning of time for revenge, for redeeming and avenging yourself, and how sometimes instead of forgiving and loving, they'll do the opposite and just hate and try and take revenge by all means. And then you have Spit Out the Bone, which talks about how humans who created machines will have machines take over their roles. Because humans are fragile, they have bones, they break, they have feelings, they distract them, they are subjects to error. Unlike machines, they're more powerful, they're more efficient. In all of these topics of man being hardwired to self-destruct on all the different songs are sort of wrapped up on the title track Hardwired. The song is kind of the summation of the entire album idea. And some songs on the record are not relevant to this lyrical theme, because come on, after all, Hardwired is not a concept album. For example, Dream No More is about the Cthulhu mythology, Murder One is a tribute to Lemmy from Motorhead, and etc. You get the idea. What about the album art? Does it have to do anything with the album lyrical theme? Actually, no, not at all. They just had the idea for the album art at Lars's wedding. The photographers gave them a wedding gift, and that wedding gift was a photo of Lars's face and his wife's face superimposed on top of each other. So Lars showed it to James, and he was like, when we do the next record, we want to make these guys make a photo of all of our faces on top of each other. And that's what eventually occurred on Hardwired to Self-Destruct.
I met those guys, I don't know, like 4 or 5 years ago, doing a shoot for something. A couple of years ago when Jess and I got hitched up in the mountains, we asked them to come up and shoot the wedding. For a wedding present, they gave this crazy picture of the two of us superimposed on top of each other.
Yeah.
It's this awesome thing, and I showed it to James, I think up at the wedding. So it's like one day when we do something in the future, we should get these guys to do all of us on top of each other.
So now, let's get to the solos on Hardwired to Self-Destruct. And I really have a problem with this album when it comes to the lead work, cause I know Kirk, and I know what he's capable of. On all the albums, he really wrote incredible stuff. But on Hardwired, he just had a very different plan than what he used to do beforehand. Back in the 80s, 90s, and even Death Magnetic, Kirk examined the rhythm really well and planned his melodies and composed absolutely amazing solos. Here, what Kirk does is going to the studio and improvising the entire solo just on the top of his mind with no planning, which leads to the disappearance of the thing that made his solo stand out in the first place: distinct melodies, great hooks here and there, and of course with the addition of shredding. On Hardwired, a lot of the solos just felt like random shredding with no distinct melodies, just felt a little uninspired, like as if he just worked on them for 5 seconds only. And I know he has this logic of capturing the moment and savoring the moment and all of that, but that does not do his solos any justice.
Yeah, I thought it would be great if I didn't work on the guitar solos beforehand. It's a pretty bold thing, and it's a really challenging thing because I like to be well prepared when it comes to anything that has to do with music and my guitar playing. I want to, show up to the scene, knowing my parts, being able to execute them perfectly. That's my thing, is showing up well prepared, and that was my MO for all the albums. Wanted to capture a moment, be 100% spontaneous, and improvise as much as possible to really catch whatever is going to come out. It forced me to have faith in my own abilities.
A lot of the solos just feel repetitive, and as mentioned, they have no distinct melodies, just random shredding, which is really not my cup of tea. And I noticed that on a lot of parts, Kirk literally just follows what the drums and rhythm are doing. And I don't want to be too harsh on Kirk, because I actually do enjoy the solos on Hardwired. I think they're pretty decent, good enough. But huge gap between what Kirk does on all the other records and Hardwired, except maybe for Kill 'Em All, because Kirk also was doing this improvised shreddy style. All of the solos have few really catchy parts that are pretty attractive to me, and I really like them. But these parts are so few because of how many random shredding and repetitive melodies there are because of the improvising. But let's just say, yes, there are a few really good moments on Hardwired solos. And to be honest, there are a few really well-composed solos on Hardwired that I really like. One of them for me is the solo for Now That We're Dead. A lot of people don't like it, but I think it's an awesome solo. I also really like the multiple solos done for Halo on Fire. The really great quality of lead work there. And I think the Hardwired title track solo is really good because it serves such a short duration really well. What about James? Does he have any solos on Hardwired? Well, James does not have a full-on Big James solo moment, like on Suicide and Redemption or To Live Is To Die, but he does have a small lead part in Now That We're Dead, and I think it's pretty good. Now let's get to the writing process and see how Metallica wrote this great record. Well, for instance, after Metallica on Saint Anger and Death Magnetic tried to change things, making everybody contribute and everybody gets a writing credit and everybody gets involved in songwriting, it seems that on Hardwired, they returned to the normal process. Lars and James doing most of the writing, or actually on Hardwired, they basically did the entire thing together, and Kirk and Rob were secondary. So I guess as the writing process returned to the normal thing, writing credits also returned to being normal. Lars and James received a writing credit for every single song alone, and Rob only received just the one, being on Mankind. So yeah, after Metallica tried to change things, they returned to their original way. Lars and James controlling everything. Riffs, composition, tempos, everything that has to deal with songwriting. What about Kirk? Where was he? On every single Metallica album after Kill 'Em All, Kirk got writing credits and wrote riffs and ideas. So where was he on Hardwired? Hardwired is the first record since 1984 where Kirk did not write a single riff. Well, Kirk said that he lost like 300 riffs or something because he lost his phone where he recorded them on.
And, it must have meant to have happened for me to lose all those riffs. Because, I didn't exactly find them afterwards. And as a result of that, the outcome of that is that I'm sitting on a bunch of stuff now. And, my attitude now is if I can't remember something, if I have to record it, maybe it wasn't that great to begin with.
For me, though, that seems like a pretty lame excuse. Like, that's the Metallica version of my dog ate my homework. Like, how could you have 300 plus riffs and could not remember a single one of them? You lost your phone only, not your memory, too. And also, as we said, the solo job was pretty questionable on Hardwired. So I really hope Kirk does his homework on the next record, because Hardwired seems like such a low point for him. And Lars was not happy at all with Kirk losing all of these riffs. He was like, you have to back it up on your computer.
Kirk, I believe, lost his phone. I was with him. We were somewhere. We were doing a photo session, and he also lost. I don't know if it was the same phone or different phone. So, boys and girls, just don't put any, cool musical ideas on your phone, without backing them up at least. Okay, seriously. Didn't we get that part in tech school somewhere?
Yeah.
Rob was much less involved in composing sessions, but he did a great job on the bass. He got a writing credit on Mankind, and really his bass parts were really, really great. So no complaints there. He did a great job. But in contrast to that, Rob contributed a lot to Death Magnetic. So it's really weird why Hardwired was such a monopoly by James and Lars. And overall, we saw them in the making-ofs, how James and Lars were composing only together most of the time. They were the only ones in the studio, James getting riffs, and Lars composing the songs and coming up with arrangements. I think we can all agree that Hardwired was an album that was really inspired by Metallica's old work. Not self-ripping off, but you could see a bit of a connection there between old Metallica and the new Metallica on this record. And I think Lars himself admitted that they were getting quite comfortable with their past.
I hear a lot of your old music in this record. I've heard this from a number of people. Like, you know, when I hear Spit It Out, I hear Metal Militia. And, you know, when I hear Atlas Rise, I hear Master of Puppets. All those sounds, are they hardwired into your DNA? Is that, it seems to become natural, right? Or is it...
I think that's a very valid and fair statement. You know, there's only so many chords on a guitar, and there's only so many drum beats, and sooner or later, they're all part of sort of the same food groups or whatever.
And that indeed is really true. A lot of riffs and solos seemed like they were subconsciously recycled. And recycled here does not mean a bad thing. It means you could just see a connection there. But they are two separate riffs with two separate melodies. But if you focus and you got a good ear for music, I think you would notice the link between the old riffs and the hardwired riffs. And Hardwired was not only inspired by Metallica's old work, but it was also inspired by some of Metallica's favorite bands, their inspirations. You got, for example, Atlas Rise. The demo name for it was NYOBHM, which is short for the New Wave of British Heavy Metal. So they were doing this on purpose. And the song is very, very clearly inspired by Iron Maiden. And I think a lot of people caught on to that. You also have Confusion, and the intro of the song is very clearly inspired by Diamond's Head, Am I Evil? And I also think a lot of people caught on to that. Hardwired has a very diverse and dense track list that is full of music because it's made out of 2 discs. So as we said, there is a lot of variety there. You have a couple of quite thrashy old school songs like Spit Out the Bone, Atlas Rise, Hardwired, and Moth into Flame. You also have a ballad, which is Halo on Fire, a very long ballad full of riffs and melodies and heavy parts, which is shaped mostly like the classic Metallica power ballad formula. Hardwired also includes a bunch of slow, heavy, meaty songs, such as Dream No More and Am I Savage. You also have variety in duration. You have short songs like Hardwired, medium songs like Moth into Flame, and really long songs like Halo on Fire, for example. And actually, mid-tempo songs fill the track list much more than the thrashy stuff, such as Now That We're Dead and Murder One. And Hardwired has, for the first time ever, a music video on each song. Even the non-single songs, they all do have their visual representation. I mean, you gotta overproduce to please the mass audience in this day and age. And I think most people would say that the first disc is the better one, and the most hated songs are on the second disc. But I think the second disc has some really cool material that is worth checking out, like Am I Savage, Man and Kind, Here Comes Revenge, Murder One, and of course, Spit Out the Bone. All are kick-ass songs with great riffs, great vocals, great lyrics. And the fan favorites and the singles are on the first disc. And yeah, I agree too that the first disc is the superior one. And the album track listing is very different compared to the other records. Well, for instance, Metallica always made the title track number 2, and it would be the long, complex song. On Hardwired, it was the opposite on both. It was the shortest song and the opener to the record. Also on Hardwired, there was no number 4 ballad, which is a classic Metallica legend like Fade to Black, Sanitarium, One the Unforgiven. All take the number 4 placement on the track list. It became the number where Metallica ballads exist. However, Halo on Fire was number 6 on the track list, which more or so served the same role as the old albums. Metallica used to have 4 songs on disc 1 and 4 songs on disc 2 back in the 80s. So the ballad closing off disc 1 in number 4 is pretty much the same thing as the ballad, which is Halo on Fire, closing off the first disc, but on number 6 because there are now 6 songs. Basically the same logic. So let's first talk about the riffs. Riffs on Hardwired are awesome and versatile. You got some thrashy riffs, Hardwired also has some melodic, clean riffs. Hardwired also has heavy, slow, headbanging riffs, which are really good on this record. What about harmonies? Well, Hardwired does have its share of awesome, melodic, beautiful harmonies that I absolutely love. And I think Lars also did a pretty awesome job when it comes to the drums. He really made a lot of unique, cool drum parts on this record that made an impact on the listening experience. And I noticed that Lars added a lot of double bass into his drum parts, which is always a nice addition. And Hardwired has a couple of really cool bass moments on the record. So we discussed everything we could today about the latest Metallica record. So tell me, what did you think of the video? And what do you think of Hardwired in general? What's your favorite song? What's your least favorite song? And it's a shame. That's the last studio album review until the next one drops, hopefully. So yeah, I'll try and review some of their other projects.